Take a look at Romans 6:1. So let's go there. He starts off, the Apostle Paul starts off saying, "What shall we say then?" Okay, briefly, he's actually pointing back to Romans 5:20 on this one when he's saying, "What shall we say then?" And in Romans 5:20, we learned that about the law of Moses and how when the Ten Commandments were introduced to mankind, it actually had the opposite effect. It actually agitated the sin nature within man. If for a little bit more detail, go back to Romans 5:20 in the videos and Romans 5:21. But we learned that the law entered, right? It was shown to mankind. It was just supposed to show him his sinful nature. It was supposed to show him what was in his heart. It was supposed to show him what he couldn't do. It was supposed to show him that he needed to throw himself on the mercy of grace by placing his faith in the coming Redeemer who came not to abolish the law, but to fulfill it. And so that's what it was supposed to do. And when he says, "What shall we say then?" He's actually learning to this last part of Romans 5:20. He's talking about where sin abounded, because it did. It got worse. And he's saying that grace did much more abound, that grace is enough to cover it. Jesus Christ's finished work was complete. He atoned for all sin. When he was on the cross and he was taking the sin penalty of mankind at 12 o'clock in the afternoon when the sky went dark, and he said, "Father, Father, why have you forsaken me?" This was the point in time where God the Father looked into the past, present, and future and saw all the sin that man did, is still, and was going to commit in thought, word, and deed, and took it out on his son right there on the cross. That's what we call the atonement. And that's what he did. He dealt with the sin penalty. He took the sin penalty on our behalf, taking the claim away from the devil. And he broke the indwelling power of the sin nature. And that's an important part that's missed a lot. And it's important to understand that sin nature was dealt with. So when we place our faith in it, that we will experience that, and that's the environment the Holy Spirit can legally come into and operate in our heart and life. So when he says, "What shall we say then?" he's actually talking about grace. He's saying, so since we're under the state of grace, actually let me go forward. He says, "What shall we say then? Shall we continue in sin that grace may abound?" And what he's talking about there is that when we place our faith in Jesus Christ's finished work, when we learn that he spoiled, when we place our faith in Jesus Christ's finished work, that he spoiled all principalities and powers that we see in Colossians 2:15, that he defeated the devil, that he silenced that indwelling sin nature, and that he paid the sin debt on our behalf. He's saying, what other way to dignify this? Should we go on sinning just because we know grace is enough to cover it? We call that license. One of the things you'll learn is that sin is often dealt with by the human race in about 4 or 5 different ways. There's struggling with it. There's license, which we're talking about right now. I'm under the state of grace, so I can continue to go on sinning. It's okay. And that's not what God's saying. He's saying he gave us liberty to lead a holy life through power and person of the Holy Spirit. What shall we say then? So we have license, we have struggle, we have denial, and then there's ignorance, and then there's grace. And that's what we're talking about here. Ignorance is kind of self-explanatory, like, not really knowing or pretending. And then denial is that certain things aren't sin when we know they are. And so what he's saying here is that, shall we continue in sin that grace may abound? He's saying that it is not okay to go on sinning. And more importantly, actually, when you really break it down in the Greek, since we know he's talking about the sin nature, he's not just talking about actions, watching our P's and Q's, because we learned back in Romans 5:20 that that's not enough, that routines, regimens, do this and do don'ts, and to-do lists and religiosity is not what we are to place our faith in. That actually frustrates the grace of God. And so what he's saying is that grace is enough to cover it. It's not an excuse, but it's liberty to lead a holy life. And we are to consider ourselves dead to that sin nature and alive unto God, and live accordingly. and it's a blessing. And that's Romans 6:1. So thank you guys. Thank you for watching. God bless you all.